thinking quite a lot.
Recording is on.
All right.
Going.
Hello. I am Gio. I am joined today by Cyrus, and we will be talking sort of about the alchemy of everything in the world, or to kind of put it maybe in bigger language, is grand narrative and the structure of the modern world, intellectually, psychologically, spiritually, and probably the framework for this might be something like the dead zone, the intellectual dead zone after atheism, sort of the post-atheistic, post-pure rationality worldview that. Where I've structured a lot of the thinking that goes into that territory under the linguistic header of cultural philosophy. Thinking of culture as something deeply sacred that we participate in, that goes beyond simply things that are like rational in a like systemic worldview, and then philosophy, which is I think the best language we have for the highest form of intellectual art. And I don't think that there's a better word to describe sort of as thinking as deep and as broadly and as precisely and as articulately as you possibly can. I think that the language header for that is philosophy. So that is sort of the basic framework that we're going to be playing from, and then we're just going to see how the conversation goes. So I think the best way to start this, Cyrus, is for you to introduce a little bit of your sort of history of thinking. You know, you were an atheist and tormented by nihilism, and decided that that was a waste of body and soul and mind, and sort of forged yourself out into a new landscape that happens to align with the landscape that I find myself in, having gone from homeschooled Catholic conservative, where half the people I grew up with thought the earth was 6,000 years old. And we found ourselves in a place where we feel like whenever we're in a room and there's communication happening, we feel like we're on the same wavelength. And that, I think, is the bedrock of this as a conversation. So why don't you introduce yourself and a little bit of, how you flow through the world?
Yeah. I think the easiest way to do that would be something like a traditional history of education and employment. I was a declared computer science major for most of my time in school, from when I was a freshman until my senior fall. But I didn't feel that sort of, inspired, I think, by a lot of the prospects for my career that working in computer science seemed to entail to me. And this is where, I did a delicate name dropping of an elite school while trying not to look like an arrogant prick. So I think this was especially true at Stanford. There are a lot of criticisms of the Stanford computer science culture being pretty pre-professional. A lot of people really gunning to start a new startup, become the next Snapchat billionaires. And I definitely would say that is not an accurate description of everybody in computer science. There are certainly some people who are still interested in it for more philosophical reasons, but it was pretty overwhelmingly true that was what people wanted to talk about. It was hard to find groups of people that were interested in talking about this type of thing that we're having right now. Are we understanding the world correctly? If we're not understanding the world correctly, what fundamental propositions will we need to question and replace with something better? That was definitely not super popular. I also invested a lot of time in playing Ultimate Frisbee. That was actually, ironically, one of the main reasons that I chose to go to Stanford. I played Frisbee in high school and took a look at the the schools that had finished at the top of the national tournament, and then basically just cross-reference that against schools that had good academic track records, and to go to the school that had the best combination of frisbee prowess and academics, and that was Stanford at the time. So anyways, as I implied, I didn't end up graduating with a CS major. I redeclared my senior fall into a double major in history and English with an emphasis on creative writing. And that was, in many ways, a good decision, I think, but also didn't really solve some of the core existential desires that I was trying to solve by leaving computer science. Particularly in the English department. The English department at Stanford was pretty was well into its stage, well into being overrun by wokeness by the time I was there. I ended up dropping the English major when I was taking the English thesis class because I had probably 1 or 2 classes left, and all of the potential topics that we were encouraged to write on just struck me as not only deeply uninteresting, but also related to a way of understanding the world that wasn't that nuanced or empathetic or inspiring. And so I dropped the English major and ultimately just finished with a history major. And so I think that I was just listening to something yesterday about how the emphasis placed on a broad liberal education by some of the founding fathers of the United States was not arbitrary. It wasn't just that they thought that you should know a little bit about, or you should know a lot about a lot in order to be a good conversationalist at cocktail parties. They really thought that in order to have a meaningfully accurate understanding of the world, you couldn't just be a specialist. You really needed to have a pretty broad understanding of a lot of different topics. And I think that I sort of accidentally stumbled my way into a liberal arts education, although a lot of it happened after I graduated. So my first job was in journalism. I got a fellowship and worked at a newspaper in Vermont for about 3 or 4 months, and then worked at a robotics company.
Before we get too deep into that, so where's kind of your home turf?
Intellectually?
No, locationally. Yeah.
So I am from Vermont. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yep. And actually, now I live in the Northeast Kingdom in Vermont, which is famous for being sort of a magnet for eccentrics. And I think that I probably fit that description in a lot of ways. So yeah, anyway, I think that working at the robotics company is really when I started to better develop some of my quantitative skills of understanding the world. And it was sort of through that process that I feel like I've come to a better understanding that I had when I was just thinking about things in sort of the conventional historiographical ways that were encouraged in the history department. And I mean, I don't think there was really that much of an emphasis at all placed on having a well-rounded and sort of complete understanding of the world in the computer science department. It was much more, really, we're going to make sure you have a great hang of algorithms and data structures and how operating systems work and that kind of thing, which is obviously very practically useful, but maybe fails to provide some of the information you need to really figure out how human culture works, for instance. I think so. That was all just basically a long CV. I would say that I found my way into IDW type thinking around April, and it started with
April. Which April?
This year.
2020.
That's right.
So like less than 6 months ago.
Yes, I think that I had heard of it and had not really looked it up because I thought it was a dumb name. I've since heard Eric Weinstein's explanation that it was intentionally a dumb name, which made me feel better about it, I guess.
Well, this is one of the things that is absolutely genius in like our circle is, so if like you've watched kind of the political history of the past decade, there was the alt-right as a movement, which was the alternative right. And that was everybody on the right wing who was tired of the bullshit of the Republican Party. That was the definition in like, I don't know, 2006 or something. or maybe not that far back, but
I think I associated it at first with sort of Tea Party type sentiment in the wake of the crisis.
So post 2008, I guess right wing, tired of the bullshit of the Republican Party, which is the same bullshit as the Democratic Party, which was the bullshit that bailed out the banks and didn't prosecute anybody in 2008. So this is the right wing version of social justice, the right wing version of the Occupy Wall Street, sort of response to events in the United States. The thing is that the right wing version of social justice has a racial ideology, and so within perhaps a year or two of this budding, youthful, new movement within the right wing, you had white supremacists saturating the conversation circles. And it didn't take long for alt-right to become a euphemism for white supremacy. And in
that's why I think it's a little more of a synonym.
Well, it's really a euphemism for white supremacy. Like, I think that's the right term. I don't think it's really synonymous. I think because synonymous would mean you definitionally apply it the same way. This means the way that alt-right is used is you can apply it to anybody who isn't the Republican, who's on the right wing, to black letter them with all the tarnish of white supremacy. And so this label has been used to attack the core people on the right who have actually done the fundamental work to beat back white supremacy in the modern internet age. And so a lot of the best people on the right who are done with the bullshit of the Republican Party, who are looking to explore new territory and find better solutions than neoliberalism and neoconservatism, have been narratively attacked with the sort of emotive toolkit that it's applied to the worst of the right instead of the best of the right. And so some of the best and most honorable people have been sort of tarnished with this label of alt-right. So the idea of intellectual dark web is to find a name which is abstract enough so that many people can fall under the header, but is not perversible in the way that alternative right could be relabeled as anything. It's very difficult to relabel intellectual dark web as something that doesn't imply sort of people who are under the radar, who are thinking in different ways. It's very difficult to relabel that. So the IDW captured the intellectual space that wasn't the white supremacist side of the alt-right, rebranded the leadership of that as the IDW, and we really haven't created like the base level of like what we're participating in as the a new renaissance of sort of deep thinking within Western civilization, that hopefully we can broaden to deep thinking within the human race and deep thinking within the modern world. But sort of the leadership side of this has a label that is nearly immune to relabeling and a remodeled attack. So it was brilliant in that, given the context where the entirety of inventive thinking that was taking place that wasn't within left-wing circles was being catastrophically mislabeled in a way that was very damaging to the ability to spread novel discourse. And one of the core points is we need inventive thinkers on both the left and the right so that we can find a new space to meet each other where the left and right are not in narrative conflict, where we can unify to solve problems. And that's a very core problem of like our current politics, is that we have Republicans and Democrats, and the fundamental structure, the plurality voting structure, causes the dual party, duopoly power structure conflict that is warlike, and we need to find solutions that are not warlike, and that means a different entire approach and take. So yeah, it was kind of a brilliant thing, but it's kind of a used dismissively, but the best they can do is it's weird people on the internet.
Mhm.
That's kind of the best way that they can dismiss it. And weird people on the internet are fucking interesting. Doesn't matter where you go. Anyways, back to what you're saying. You found it in April, and
yeah, I think that I'm the CV stuff is not as interesting as the conversation itself.
Yeah.
But that was actually, let me make sure my door's staying closed. What you were just saying was leading into where I was hoping to conclude the CV section, which is basically, I think that applying some of the modes of thinking and the methods of analysis that I picked up in the quantitative world to some of the same questions. I'm going to try and wedge this shut. My girlfriend's brother is visiting, and they just arrived, so there's going to be some noise downstairs. Let me see.
Take a minute to make it work right. I will use this as a quasi-commercial break, mostly me just talking about something that I think is really cool. So there's this company called Kin that does these non-alcoholic cocktails, and it's really evening beverages, but they're not just a alcohol replacement. The idea is more to be a experiential replacement for alcohol, and so they call it Kin, euphorics for humankind. And these are adaptogens, nootropics, and there's a third type of thing in it. Botanicals, yeah.
Mhm.
That sort of gives you a buzz without alcohol. Now, I'm, of course, drinking a glass of wine, and they say, of course, not to use it with wine, but it's probably just, the kind of stuff that you put on a random drug supplement thing. But these are great for sort of amplifying experience. The euphorics, sort of, aligns with what we would describe as happiness. And I think that there's, sort of, you take big five personality model and you abstract that from personality to, emotive state. And so you get happiness, which would be euphorics. You get curiosity, which would be openness, which would be psychedelics. Then you get pride, which would be sort of motivation or ego, but would be stimulants like cocaine, methamphetamines. Those sort of amplify that emotional state. Personality wise, you would be conscientious. Then, you have like a love, compassion, agreeableness. So the emotive state of love. For that, you have aphrodisiacs. And so what am I at? 3. So creativity, happiness,
You had openness.
love. Yeah. So that's creativity, curiosity, psychedelics, euphorics, happiness, and then that would be like extroversion, right? And then you've got sort of love, agreeableness, aphrodisiacs. Then you've got let's see. Well, we've got fear or neuroticism, and that would be something that hasn't really been classified yet, but I'm calling it like a tumoric elixir. So the tumor or tumor, fear in Latin. Yeah, I guess we're gonna have to take a break for a second, but we'll get back to this in a moment. Yeah, there's things going on at the house. So we got stimulants, euphorics, psychedelics, tumoric elixir, and then what is the fifth?
I think I missed the beginning of this. Are you trying to map different categories of substance to the
Yeah,
personality?
but also to sort of pitch the concept of drinks that amplify experiences. And that's what this is a drink that amplifies experience, but sort of potions to amplify experience, to take us deeper into the experiential world. and I really like this concept, and I sent them an email saying, hey, you should do the full spectrum, and I'm just trying to think of what the last big five personality model trait is, and because I know what descriptors would go with it. Let's see, so we've got conscientiousness, agreeableness, openness, extroversion. What's the fifth trait?
Do you want to say neuroticism?
Yeah, that would be neuroticism. So let me just Google search this. Sorry to the audience for this crufty klutz of a thing, but
it's neuroticism, openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and extroversion.
Right. So yeah. Let me. Yeah. Where's my? Right. Here we go. All right. No. That's also broken. Why? Oh, wait. That's the thing I wanted to open. Right. So we've got euphorics for happiness, aphrodisiacs for love, psychedelics for curiosity, stimulants for pride, and temoric elixir for fear. So those are the big five. But in emotive language instead of sort of personality language, because the personalities are emotive states that you spend your time in.
Mm-hmm.
And so you sort of one of my theories that I've not yet applied that sort of models this is that I really like everything that I've ever read from Carl Jung.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read a lot, but I imagine that his model of psychology is mostly right because he was right about so many things. Every time that I've read him is like, oh yes, you're talking about it mystically in a way that also goes back scientifically into an evolutionary model, and psychology is clearly going to be built upon the evolutionary environment. And the fact that nobody in the intellectual space talks about psychology in an evolutionary framework because some psychologist pretended to make a evolutionary psychology, which we call evo-psych, which is sometimes right but mostly garbage, that we can't actually apply evolution to how the human mind works, is a very dumb framework. So somebody who from the very beginning was, he's got the concept of archetype, which is very much sort of an evolutionary model. And that's archetype, from what I've read about it, is more correct than a lot of the things that I read in psychological literature nowadays. Like, it makes more sense to me. It has more explanatory power. Because most things psychologically do not talk about deep experience, like powerful, potent, life-changing experience, in a way that is appropriately profound. And kind of a heuristic for this is that if you go into a world pre-language, so the mind worked before we had language, it's a shocking number of people think that thinking is language. In other words, you can't think without language, but the brain has been doing thinking for a long time before language.
Mm-hmm.
So
that misunderstanding, I think, is actually pretty fundamental to why postmodernism got started from some decent premises, but really went off the rails with I think the conflation of meaning and language is you can't start there and end up at a very good understanding of the role.
Yeah, but if you take the mind pre-language, and you understand the mind as something that builds itself, so play and childhood and formative years, these are the mind building itself out of the building blocks that it comes with, which are set up for a certain environment. Like we've got a shelter building instinct that we apply as children in the playing fort, playing castle game, right? We've got a predatory evasion game that is to build those skills for adulthood as predators and prey, which we call tag. And you can build out most of the core skill sets of living in the wilderness out of children's games, that these are the things that are stimulating to children, so they do them. But these are also fundamental evolutionary games that are necessary for survival. And, these things are what builds the mind for adulthood. And there are many of them beyond the two that are the most obvious. Everybody's played tag, everybody's played fort. And it was like, what is this magic thing that makes me super excited and enjoy myself? It's, part of the structure of coming into being, is part of the structure of, building a mind and becoming an adult. Those are, fundamental structures.
I think
Those
you
are,
hide and seek. Hide and seek, I think, is actually a pretty good way to develop theory of mind. You have to imagine where the seeker would look for you, and then try to go somewhere else.
yeah, hide and seek is, sort of this predator prey game that, it's a fantastic way to build an understanding of the world. Actually, like, there's a lot of nuance that can go into it. And so this is the kind of stuff that, is built into our mind, that we're born with. Kind of in my statement of, we know the trees before we're born. And the most obvious evidence for this is if you go into a cathedral and you look at the pane glass and the arches, it feels like an old growth forest. And that's
I would argue the most obvious reason for that isn't actually in humans at all. It is tests with birds where you show them pictures or other artificial approximations of some of their predatory species. Some of the animals that might try to eat them, like snakes and birds, or other bigger birds, hawks.
Yeah.
And they freak out just by never having seen it, not having been raised by their parents. And so somehow there is a fear association that is encoded in a way that doesn't rely on the environment at all.
Yeah, the fire snake cat bird of Jordan Peterson's dragon. Yeah, we have the same response. Like, spiders, fucking terrifying. Spiders were predated on our ancestors in the deep ancient past. And then dragons, snakes, people go, oh, snakes. We definitely have these instinctual responses to things, but we also have, that's one thing, is like an instinctual fear response. But I'm talking more about the building yourself out of a fundamental structure. So we're not born with a deep understanding of hide and seek, but we know the concept of hide and seek. When you play a good game of hide and seek, your brain goes, oh, that was a good game of hide and seek. It's sort of, it's like it's like a mouth that has teeth that are backwards, and so you go deeper and deeper in, and you can't go back out. Do you know what I'm describing? So that kind of a mouth, it has hooks on it, and when you hit the hook, you feel it and you know it, and so you go deeper and deeper. So, like, the mouth as a structure exists in the mind, but the destination that you go from that mouth does not exist as a pre-built structure, because the path that you need to take to that destination is unique to you, because you were born into unique circumstance. And so there's an abstraction level to, like, the way that you build the mind that allows it to apply itself to very many circumstances that you enter the world in, sort of. And so I really want to depict the building the mind concept with some depth. And I don't know where exactly I was going with this before, but sort of the way I can take this from where I'm at now in the conversation is, I think that one of the things that we have with emotions is emotions are instinctual structures that have abstracted out to be generalized. So playing fort is a, build shelter game, and the rules of building shelter depend on the environment. So you don't want to build a how to make shelter with big leaves rule system in yourself if you're going to be going from a forest to a savanna. You want to have a how to protect yourself from the environment and predators model of building fort, which is why fort is such a combative game, right? It's protect yourself from both the environment, keep yourself warm, avoid predators, et cetera, versus how to solve the specific environment. Now, there are plenty of species that live in one environment that have sort of got a more detailed, complex model of how to solve stuff that's specific to their environment that would have trouble applying elsewhere. But humans are spectacularly abstract.
Mm-hmm. What you were just saying about, or I guess the connection between fort as an abstract concept and archetype that I understand is
yeah, that's what it was. Jung.
It is the broad shape in which plasticity really sets in the details. I'm not sure if I described it that well.
Oh, I love that depiction of it. Yeah, it's the broad shape. And that's Jungian. That's the archetype. Like, he got it exactly right descriptively. Like, the channels of experience repeating themselves until they're embedded within you.
Before the door thing, you were just talking about trying to get to a world where we could have more productive and constructive and actually illuminating conversations between people who think of themselves on the right and people who think of themselves on the left.
Yes.
That was going to be an opportunity for me to connect the sort of quantitative thinking and historical thinking point that I was building to with the personal history. I think the idea that there is something important and valuable that the left as we understand it and the right as we understand it have to say is something that is a really uncomfortable idea for a lot of people who sort of unquestioningly think that their team is basically right on everything and anything the other team thinks is true is wrong. That I think that if you analyze human society from a position where you are treating it more just like a system that you need to understand and not something that you're not like something that you are emotionally embedded within, then you see traditionalism and progressivism as different forces in a homeostatic process, where you understand that a culture or a civilization has a lot of moving parts and a tendency to mutate them too rapidly and with too little consideration is going to be damaging to its stability. But then you also recognize that a culture or a civilization which is too calcified is going to be unable to adapt to a changing environment. And so if that's your model for thinking about what is conservatism, what is liberalism, or I don't really like those terms. I prefer traditionalism and progressivism.
I agree. I actually have two terminology that fits in this. So I've been thinking about, there's conversations about like what are the missing constituents, right? There's a conversation about finding constituents and stuff.
What do you mean in the American market, the constituents?
Like within politics, or and Eric has one about this. The exophile. What's the foreignophile? Like the cultural file. The
restrictionist.
Yeah, that term. Repeat it.
Xenophilic restrictionist.
Yes, xenophilic restrictionist is, within the narrative landscape that we have, is a concept that is counterintuitive, but like that's probably a majority position. Like, Americans are, the melting pot means that we are, as a culture, more familiar with foreign cultures than any other, and we're also the most embracing of like immigrants. We really love novel things here, and we love to explore the world. It's a fat, obnoxious American, but on another sense, it's like we are the people who travel the world, and we have
of tourism rising, at least to certain destinations in China. Actually, one of the things that was often commented on and laughed at by Stanford students was just how on a bike you had to dodge all of the swarms of East Asian tourists who would come to pay homage to the academic Mecca.
Yeah. And that China is becoming the second or perhaps replacement world hegemon. Is having some of that, while they're also returning more to their traditional culture from the Marxist model that they've had for the past century. And so there's interesting parallels between the U.S. and China, but the sort of the U.S. we're mostly xenophilic restrictionists, And there's complex for that, but those concepts, that's what I find interesting, is the counterintuitive constituent. And so I have two counterintuitive constituencies for you that I've had these labels around in my thinking for a couple of years. One, which is how I would describe myself, is a right-wing progressive.
That reminds me of Brett's insight that the thinking progressive is an aspirational conservative.
Yes, and then also that his Heather's father was a progressive Republican, and I think that's a terrible term because I hate the Republican Party, but I think that it's a correct intuition about where he was ideologically, which was right-wing progressivism. And sort of the right-wing progressivism thing is that the people that I identify with on an intuitive level are oftentimes on the right. My best friends are on the right. I'm white, and in our ever more racialized political landscape, I come from a Christian background. And so I was born into the right, and I'm kind of embedded in the right. And, while my worldview is much more left-wing and progressive in terms of, like position by position, I have kind of a philosophical and honorary position where I have like a loyalty to the right, in the sense that I can't abandon the right to destroy itself. I have to take care of the people that I come from in a way where they can meet like the me that I have become, instead of abandoning them and saying, I am not of those people. It's like, I am of these people and I have grown out of it, but I need to be a brother to them in their time of need so that they can join me.
So
Right?
this is beginning to get to, actually the two things. One, before we get too far from what I was saying about Brett's comment, I think I largely agree with it. One strong counterpoint I could imagine somebody making is that in an era when cultural change and technological change is very rapid, it's unlikely that any solution set you choose is going to be a good solution set for that long. And so you sort of constantly need to be on the lookout for ways in which your existing solutions aren't living up to your expectations and revising them. So I think there's some point there. I think that the counterpoint would be, yes, that's true, but we need to be really sure before we move on from things, or something like that. The thing I was going to say about feeling like you didn't want to just sort of leave people whose culture you had come from out to dry is, let me try to remember the thought. I think it is increasingly hard to do that because more and more of the non-negotiable sort of moral tests that you apply to somebody to see whether or not they're in your in-group or your out-group are secular in nature. And they also, by being secular in nature, this is a point I was making a little bit in one of the Patreon chats, they're very, they're universal in a somewhat different way from the beliefs of a faith like Christianity. I think it's a Christian might think that somebody who believes abortion is okay, or somebody who believes that Jesus was not the savior of humanity is wrong, and is maybe even immoral for thinking that. But we sort of expect it or understand it if we then learn that person is not also a Christian. Because you think, okay, well, that person hasn't read the Bible, they haven't been to church, they have not received the truth. Sort of course they don't think these things. But when the other side of that, the abortion debate, I think it's much harder to point to a particular a scripture or a set of scriptures that I'm sort of botching this point. Basically, in the enlightened secular worldview, you think that you're coming to universal truths for all people. You don't think that you're coming to truths that are specific to you and your other faith group members. If you from an enlightened moral standpoint, if you think some issue is this is the correct side of it, you kind of think that anybody from a religion who disagrees with you is just sort of a stupid religious person, and you think that anybody who's not religious and disagrees with you is prima facie immoral. I don't think there's the same understanding that somebody else is steeped in such a different worldview from your own that even though they are in many ways, in your own estimation, a good person, that they're just going to have sort of irreconcilable differences. I think that's an easier sort of like weird tension to balance when the comparison is people from different faiths as opposed to people from different secular dogma groups. Because every secular dogma group thinks that its truth is everybody's truth.
Yeah, this is why monotheism is dumb. Because it makes pluralism very difficult, and all the best solutions to like every problem are pluralistic in nature.
That's an interesting theory about the long-lasting success of the Roman Empire. Is you don't have to convince people in some given region that they're wrong. You can just say like, okay, well that's what your God wants you to do. Then you can be more satisfied only requiring them to believe in certain things, like they need to pay taxes.
Yeah. So one of the deep things that has been told to me by, it was this guy who's like an environmentalist, and he was wearing the kind of like outfit that you would imagine a safari guy to wear. So it's like it's vest with like pockets, like a leather hat. I think he was like South African. So he had a bit of an accent, and he would talk however he would talk. And he said, so we were talking about like different regions and environments, right? And so he's like, the people in every bioregion need their own gods because the gods protect the land, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in Brazil, in the rainforest, they need their gods, which protect the rainforest. But those gods would not work in the desert, and those gods would not work in a coniferous forest. In a deciduous jungle, those gods work, but they don't work in a coniferous forest. You need different gods, and I thought that was kind of a profound point. And thought about that particular
what religions were, which were just frameworks for understanding reality.
Yeah, but it's like there are, you can't solve the problems of the world with one understanding. In other words, if you had like a perfect person and you copied that person to 7 billion people, that would not make a better world. Because like that, you couldn't let me say that more elegantly. If you copied that perfect person to 7 billion people, that perfect person would mutate in each area to solve the unique problems of that area.
Well, that's something that the plasticity of our brains allows us to do, but that which is why we have successfully lived in so many places across the planet. I think that what you were just saying was sort of the idea of a single perfect instance of humanity, not even being a comprehensible idea, was making me think of you couldn't choose the best cell in a body, for instance, and be like, okay, well this is the best cell, and we're just going to make all of the cells in the body this cell. That's just not how it works. In a complex system, you need differentiated purpose for the different components.
So, that's probably a different discussion, but sort of the different environments need different psychological core structure is kind of like the core point there. And so this I think it gets us to
it's not that deep, it's that they develop. There are selective pressure that results in the development of culture.
But it's sort of like the selective pressure is an optimization process to some extent. And so, the way, like, on a purely aesthetic sense, having diversity is beautiful. Like, if you're just like, it doesn't matter what the painting is. If you can only look at one painting for the rest of your life, you're going to grow bored with it.
Probably in much less than one lifetime.
So, and then if you just look at one art style, you may be able to immerse yourself in that art style for quite a while, but to feel like that is the only art style that is allowed by existence would be an incredibly depressing thought. And to discover another art style which is built, from the ground up, to be something completely different would be like this mind-blowing experience that would be spectacularly beautiful.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking you're wrapping that up. Continue if you're not.
And so, like, from a purely aesthetic sense, diversity is a beautiful thing, but from a deep systems perspective and looking at it, on a deep evolutionary lens, like this conversation that we've had, it's also the natural and necessary perspective. And so we want effective diversity in humanity, from a genetic perspective, but also from a cultural perspective. And that a lot of what is actually good is specificity of culture. The thing that gets perverse is who manages the specificity of culture. This is kind of to Brett's point about the slaves and the Native Americans, the black slaves that were brought to the Americas, and the Native Americans that have been uniquely oppressed because they have been taken here and then had their natural culture destroyed and then replaced with a culture designed to exploit them. And the like that whole process is deeply traumatic, but also the core idea that you can be embedded in a culture which is designed to exploit you instead of designed to optimally solve your life through the world in the environment that you were born into, which is how we're designed, or not designed, but how we exist to, or how we come into being to enter the world and engage it. That is like a core problem, and that core problem and the recognition of it and the attempted solving of that core problem in a way that universalizes within a plurality, within diversity, that is one of the core I don't want to say good ideas because I want a deeper way to say this, but one of the core realizations maybe of social justice. And this is why I spend a lot of time paying attention to social justice. And really, like, I have a lot of respect for the intellectual work that's being done there. I don't think it's complete. I don't think that it actually solves the problem, but it is like, like a lot of guiding lights along the way have been lit, but they've been lit somewhat haphazardly and have also been lit in ways that lead people off of a like true path to healing and a real long-term solution. But it's a better than the sort of rationality structure that is being applied with as one universal truth, and the social hierarchy that we exist in is solely determined by how adherent you are to that one perfect rational truth.
Yeah. Was that
that's kind of a conclusive point. That there's a riff that goes off of that, but now is the perfect time for you to interject, and we'll have the conversation, and we'll probably go back to the point of rationality.
I think that a thread that's been running through the past 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, I don't even know how long, of the conversation has been the tension between the individual and the collective. That is manifestly apparent, that tension, when you are an individual in a culture that is designed to exploit. But I think that the tension exists in all cultures, and I think that the social justice movement, in many ways, or or really what we just, when I say social justice movement in this sense, I don't mean the social justice movement that you think of from 2010 until now. I sort of mean the Enlightenment project in many ways, which was the veneration of the individual, protection of individual rights, so that you can't enslave people, you can't force things to believe certain things, you can't discriminate against people if they believe something that you don't like, with some restrictions. All of those things, I think, are really rooted in choosing the individual and the individual collective tension. I think that to the extent that I have problems with the social justice movement from actually really maybe more like the early 1980s until now, certain subsections of it, increasingly growing to basically all of it recently, it has been because it lost its rootedness in valuing individual dignity and individual rights above anything else. I think that enforced conformity of language and enforced conformity of thoughts are pretty obviously antithetical to valuing the individual. And I think that in comparison to the civil rights movement of the 1960s or something, a lot of the sort of the core requests and the core issues that were being debated in the 60s and the late 50s were, should an individual have the right to be paid the same? Should an individual have the right to vote? Should an individual have the the right to go to schools that are the best public schools we can offer? All of those things. And it was much more. I think that it was so much more popular and so much more palatable to even members of the American public who may not have been super well aligned in a lot of ways at the time, was because the connection was clear to the broader Enlightenment project.
The individual is universal.
Yeah. The one consequence that I want to explore a little bit of our veneration of the individual is I think that veneration bled in some ways into a fixation on the individual as well. So I think that it's right to venerate the individual, but it's wrong to think that by understanding the individual really well, you can understand what it means to be a human, or you can understand how human culture works.
Yeah.
One of the ways that I was thinking about this, so we hinted about this a little bit when I was saying that progressivism and traditionalism are sort of they're forces in a homeostasis. That leads to the question of homeostasis of what system? I think that I still really haven't reached the end of this sort of intellectual process, but I would say that the most interesting things I've been thinking about for the past couple months have been defaulting to analyzing human behavior and human culture by placing looking at it with the collective lens as my default, as opposed to the individual lens. I will demo one of my attempted aha moment inducing questions.
Go ahead.
I was talking to a friend of mine about this on Thursday, and I think it mostly worked. It works with a parallel. Basically, evolution, as it's commonly understood, is an explanation for speciation in biological organisms. That's, if you look at Wikipedia, I think it says, actually, it's worth reading it just to get it right. Let's see. The opening sentence is, evolution is a change in heritable characteristics of biological populations over successive generations, which is true, sort of. But that it's also, by constraining it to that specific domain, I think it actually hides a lot of the truth of what evolution is. Evolution, as defined elsewhere, is a set of three critical characteristics that can exist in any sort of system. It's heritability, variation, and differential success. I think that, so the parallel that I was trying to draw this to is, if those are the three characteristics that we require for a system to behave evolutionarily. And we sort of think of evolution as really being those things. It's not really a manifestation in any particular system. It's just those characteristics. Are there similar characteristics? Is there a similarly narrowly defined set of characteristics that you could come up with for what intelligence is? And I don't mean this in like an IQ, like who's smarter than whom kind of way. The friend I was talking to about this is a machine learning researcher, and so I was trying to get his input on it because he's much more familiar with neural network theory than I am. I would say that I was sort of passingly familiar with a lot of it. I did a lot of applied computer vision work at my robotics company, and so I understand how backpropagation works, et cetera, but I definitely haven't designed any neural networks from scratch or that kind of thing. But the question I asked him, and this is not the aha question, was, is it reasonable to say that our best hunch for what intelligence is a large network with lots of interconnectivity and sort of patterns of association between nodes in the network that are consistent, but then also that have some plasticity. That is, in broad strokes, how artificial neural networks work. And that seems like how we think human brains work. We have neurons and axons and synapses and all that. And there are certainly strong patterns of connectivity between different sections of different clusters of nodes in the brain. This is an important question to ask, because if that's true, then I think that we can come up with a lot of other systems of networks with lots of interconnectivity and patterns of associativity. And if I guess the answer to the evolution question about is it just something that happens with biological organisms, or is it a type of system that could exist in a different domain, in a different substrate? Is obviously yes. Memes, famously Richard Dawkins in the 60s, where he argued that we should understand ideas or memes as also evolving in a real way, not just like a metaphorical way. And so the question is, can we come up with a similar distillation of intelligence? And if we can, where else do we find that? I think that one of the answers is actually human collections, human cultures. I think that language as our sort of foundational method of really high bandwidth relative to any other animal communication was the first way that we really stepped up our degree of connectivity. And then since then, we've stepped it up with subsequent technologies, with writing, with song, with epic poetry, and then now, I guess I'm doing this in non-chronological order, with computers, smartphones, social media, etc. And so I've been thinking about
film and theater.
Sorry, go ahead.
Film and theater are deeply important in that story, but
yeah, they are, sure. So if you were taking the sort of collective first lens, then when you're thinking about, for instance, some given cultural group, you don't really think of it as a collection of a whole bunch of people who think a certain thing. You think of it as a system which maybe has some methods of homeostasis. One of those might be cultural conservatism, which is the network will attempt to make will attempt to keep its structure basically in some way. And in the ability for cultures to change, that's where you have plasticity. I guess one of the kind of I'm not sure it's exactly a thought experiment, but one of the potential demonstrations of this idea that I was thinking about was how with organisms we understand it in this many layered sort of networked way, where you have organisms have organs, which have cells, which have organelles, and there's also a whole bunch of other complicated things, some of which seems like it doesn't really make sense we don't really know where to draw the line, and sometimes it can be hard. Mitochondria seem like they have a different origin story in our composition from the rest of our cells. And so if you're looking at a human collective, you're like, okay, well, once you are willing to also, I guess actually there are two ideas here. There's the intelligence thing, and then the other idea is that you can have organisms or something, and you have metaphorical organisms that consist of parts from different domains. So, humans have cells that don't have any mitochondrial DNA, and then we also have mitochondria. And we, while we're eating, we have food that's in the process of being digested, et cetera, et cetera. We're sort of complicated systems. It's not just one thing. If you take, a village from like an agricultural era, say like, I don't know, 1000 AD or something, there are definitely parts of the village that you really need to understand in order to understand the village as a system that are not human people. They're not humans' bodies or humans' minds. There's also, it has wheat fields. It has like a mill for turning the wheat into flour or whatever. There are a lot of parts of it that seem pretty obviously analogous to organs. And so I guess I've just been I've been thinking about this maybe most in regard to how this affects our understanding of reality. So I kind of think that in order for a human.
Recording is on.
All right. Looks like we had a mandatory break, which is appropriate. We both needed a few minutes to kind of recoup. But right when the last recording died, I was telling Cyrus that we had just reached the jump off point where we would begin discussing the nature of gods. And so I think that's an appropriate spot to enjoy this conversation from, because I can't follow exactly the same thread of thought that you were following, sort of all the way to my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I can take my perspective into a place where we're kind of in the same framework together. And we can kind of figure out as we go where our different frameworks kind of connect up, because we have discovered these things from kind of opposite ends of the landscape of thinking. So I think this will be an interesting approach. So we were kind of talking about human systems and the meta of human systems.
And specifically how those are maybe more than analogous to intelligence. Maybe they are
yes.
different manifestation
yes.
of.
So so I kind of I like to take this conversation in the orientation of the sacred and what sacred means psychologically. So I think that the best definition of sacred, or maybe not, like I don't like technical definitions in general. Like I think that the standard to actually reach a technical definition is so high that only like 10 things can be technically defined, and that everything else is a functional rubric that's the best we can do. And I think like almost everything has like an explicit technical definition that is seen as the perfect definition, and it's like most things like that are just objective definitions. This is what we can measure, so this is the definition, versus this is specifically the thing, and the measurement criteria for this line up 1-to-1. There are very few things that work that way, and so I'm very, very lacking in confidence for this sort of definition. So best definition is like, that's bad words for something. The definition I use because it works to the best of my ability to articulate the understanding that I have, and I need a word that fills in that concept space. But until I have that word, I've described it, and I've described my reasons for thinking this way. Is sacred things are things that are greater than your individual human life in a way that is worth sacrificing your individual human life to maintain. There are things worth dying for. And collection of things worth dying for, what we describe as the sacred.
I think it's pretty close to my operational definition as well, which is something like a transcendent truth.
Yeah. And you can reach this in a huge number of ways. We're going to die. So why die a pathetic life?
I think some of the reason that sacred truths can make you feel better is because they reorient your identity, and they make it less entirely about your personal somatic body, and it's also about your role in a culture that began before you were born and will continue after you died, or a religion.
Yeah.
And it's also it is a connection to the abstract, often, the abstract idea of the culture before and after you. But I think that things can be sacred if they make you feel deeply connected to other individual humans as well, because it's obvious that they are going to continue after you die, and that they existed before you were born. So there's two forms of sacredness.
There's 2 to 3 to 4 takes on this, but the first take is you're going to die, so why die after having lived a pathetic life? And that's a bit of an egocentric take, but it's essentially, why live in misery when you can die in bliss, or you can die in honor, or something like that. And that isn't fully explanatory, but it gives you sort of a model of experientially it is better to sacrifice yourself to die for something like powerfully moving, and to live in the experience of being powerfully moved to the point of taking on death, than to live in fear and cowardice and to run away and suffer. And that's kind of the purely experiential model. And then
can you dig into what you mean by pathetic life?
Well,
I assume you don't mean somebody who doesn't have a Ferrari.
Yeah, you can live cowering in fear, and you can have billions and live in cowering in fear. You can constantly run away from your problems. You can live in alcohol. You can live in drug abuse, right? Instead of facing your fears, facing your problems. There's a Jordan Peterson line, which is confront the dragon, get the gold, bring it back to share it with the community. That's a romanticization of the dragon's gonna fucking kill you, but letting the dragon, run roughshod over your crops is not an improvement over dying facing the dragon. Dying of starvation, after not facing the dragon is not an improvement over dying facing the dragon. The difference is that you starve to death, and that sucks.
Yeah, I think you could argue pretty strongly that it is whatever the antonym of an improvement is. What is the antonym of improvement? It's a decrease in quality.
Well, the degeneracy is one term for that, but collapse, degradation. I like pathetic. But yeah, that's sort of one take. But there's another thing, is that the only way to obtain immortality is to die for something greater than yourself that transcends you and goes on beyond you and is beautiful.
You think that it's specifically dying for it? You don't think that it is contributing to it during your life?
Let me translate that to less explicitly over the top language. Sacrificing yourself to something greater than you, that lives on beyond you, that is beautiful.
And that might be through just working hard on something that is important throughout the course of your life, and sacrificing your base desires, satisfying your base desires.
Well, it's not satisfying your base desires. I don't like that articulation of stuff. That's far too Christian for me.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I was I actually
one of the things
Christian, but
yeah, but it's the entire Western intellectual architecture is built out of Christianity, and I am kind of I am an animist, a philosopher, a polytheist. As the synthesis of animism and philosophy leads me to polytheism. So I describe myself in some sense as a polytheist, even though I'm still an atheist.
Okay, well, this leads very obviously to the question of how you define a god then.
Yes, yes. But sort of we'll carry on the thread that we had because it will lead to where the conversation needs to go. So there's this sacrifice. Can you rerun like the last minute? Because I've kind of lost myself. I'm
Sure.
like
You were saying,
now
I would
almost
ask,
3 glasses of wine deep, like at
I would
least two
ask,
glasses of wine deep. So I'm a little bit
got it. Is that a god?
alcohol.
Yeah.
Eh, um, I think that you could talk about it that way, but there's a framework for okay. So the sacred, what is worth sacrificing to yourself to that is sacred, and the archetypal version of sacrifice is accepting death. So what is worth dying for is kind of a over articulation of the core point, but I think it stands um, well. Sacrificing yourself to dying for if you are willing to die for something, the sacrifice is more powerful, even if it is not fatal. And so, in some sense, I want to carry both forms of language of this, but if I had to choose between the two, I would take, the language of death over the language of sacrifice because it is more archetypally profound. Um, and also, but there are some things about sacrifice. You can sacrifice yourself to multiple gods, which is kind of you can't die for multiple things unless those things synthesize into a unity, which, both of those can work in like a deep intellectual way, but I like to carry both at the same time. And language, because it is sequential, has trouble carrying sort of these deeply profound integrative plural concepts in their distributed form, which is one of the tragedies of language that we make up for somewhat with music, because you can have multiple layers to music that can integrate across multiple meanings, which is kind of, and that's the same with theater. You can have multiple actors in a theater.
Mm.
um
That's a point.
and
I'm just gonna pin this to come back to later, but that reminds me of why visualization is so important, or my take on why
yes,
visualization is so important.
yeah, I take that quite hard, that I don't like language and I love theater, even though I'm not a theater kid and I hate acting and theater and stuff. It's like there's something deeply profound about a story with a myriad of characters. And I need to charge my computer, so I'm gonna have to get up in a minute. But one of the things All right. All right. So I'm back. Hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yeah, so apologies there. We're recording, so that's good. But yeah, my battery died. It wasn't a minute. It was literally like 10 seconds later. I get the pop-up warning me the batteries, I need to charge it, and then it's like gone. All right, so we're back, and I've lost kind of my thread of thought there. So um uh let me
You're
make
talking
sure.
about animism, polytheism, and yet somehow still atheism.
Yes, so the let me try and articulate this within a different framework, because I think that'll work better. Um, let's get this set up so I'm comfortable and look good and everything's kind of working. Camera angles wise, right? So a different way to say that I'm an atheist is to say that. Let me actually just pull up the to the speaking of using words well. I have a sort of optimized articulation for this, that I've written down in my notes, that is probably easier than trying to remember drunk. Um, or maybe not like drunk, but like very tipsy. Um, It'll just take a minute because I've got this entire note set that's just like words and words and words that'll take a while to scroll through. Apologies for that. Okay. All right. Here's the articulation. To the extent the mythical domain lessens the physical world, I despise it. To the extent the physical world lessens the mythical domain, I despise it. The only true form to accept is a harmonious unity that brings interwoven beauty to both. To claim otherwise is to sell your body and soul power. Correctness and right relationship is a domain independent truth. So the understanding there is, let's assume that we live in essentially a materialistic reality with no sort of fundamental metaphysics that determines spiritual reality. Like, experience still is the fundamental thing that matters. We're conscious, we experience consciousness, therefore the things that are the purveyance of consciousness are the most important, because they are what grounds value structures to experience. If we have a mythical reality or a mystical reality, the spiritual experience is actually fundamental about something that integrates with a broader universe beyond E equals MC squared. That in that is something that is important. Like, there may be some war between angels and demons, and it is partly up to us to determine the outcome of that war by our participation. To the level that either of those degrades the profundity of the other, I don't want to play stupid games, and so I don't want to participate in destroys reality. I want to participate in reality that makes reality more profound, more experientially deep. And so, given that deception exists, I despise anything that makes reality less profound than it could be, because I assume that anything that makes reality less profound than it could be is a deception.
Interesting.
So I describe myself as an atheist in the sense that I want the freedom to determine existence, and in that freedom, I want to choose the most beautiful potential thing.
I think you came to a very similar conclusion along a very different road.
Yeah, like this is,
Oh, go.
this is the kind of conversation that we've been building to since we first met each other, I think. Because I think we've both definitely recognized that we're on a similar wavelength, but we are completely different in terms of origins. So yeah, I
See
fully
a lot
agree
of
with you.
that
But
around.
go ahead with your point.
I see a lot of that specifically about understanding the human collective in a slightly different way. I think I see a lot of people talking about secular dogmas as being very, 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 very similar in their functioning and their experience to religions. I was just reading a conversation on letter.wiki earlier today between, I'm actually not remembering their names, but there were two women who both were raised in Islam and then became, if not atheists, at least very different practitioners of Islam. And they were talking about how many parallels they saw between Islam and wokeism. And I think that's sort of one attempt to understand this, collective human phenomenon of zealous belief in a secular dogma in a way that puts the collective like emergent phenomenology at the center of the understanding. So I think I've seen some of that. I've seen Brett and Heather occasionally talk about how part of the reason why sense making is so trash right now is because we are a meta-organism that is going through senescence. I feel like I've seen a couple other places. Oh yeah, I think some people are really interested in artificial intelligence and AI threat. Talk about how we're already in sort of this weird intermediate space where we do experience some types of AI threat in like not entirely artificial intelligence systems, but systems where there's an interface between human operators and non-AGI artificial intelligence. And they're all
just the economy itself is essentially, a very boring version of the paperclip optimizer. Like,
is it boring? Is the question.
I mean, most of the things that we're paperclip optimizing for are very boring.
They're terrifying in their boredom, and so
yes, that's true. No, they're definitely terrifying. Like, yeah. Multiple economic forces are existential threats. Multiple economic forces are existential threats, and something I said to, that I go to this. I'd call it an ideas conference, but somebody else from a different perspective would describe it as a social justice conference. Biannually, it's here in the Northwest. One is in Canada, in the inner islands of Vancouver, so the Inner Passage Islands of Vancouver, and then another one is on one of the islands, the San Juan Islands, here in Washington State. And it's a group of people, some people that are renowned, like on the edge of household name people will be at this. I don't want to name drop because it's not appropriate to this conversation, but if I named 3 of them, you would recognize at least one, but I can't really predict which one you would know. Right? So it's that level of people. So it's 1,000 most famous people in the world, like at least within intellectual circles. The people you might not know a lot about them, but you'll at least recognize the name. There's multiple of those kind of people at these conferences, and I've been to them. And one of the things that I said to one of the environmentalist type people that I was talking with, because if I have a first love, it's probably nature, just like the living world. Like that's my first love. Like your first love, it might be like computers or the sort of the product of explicit rational thinking, but you grew beyond that as you grew into wisdom. We'll say it that way. For me, like I remember role playing cowboys and Indians as like a 6-year-old and wanting to be the Indian because I was sort of with the nature spirits instead of with the gunpowder
of that game when I was 7 as well. I grew up in a household that was pretty anti-computer, so I definitely eventually became deeply enmeshed in computer stuff. But if anything, I would say that I shared that as my first love.
Yeah, and that I think is a parallel for me because my family was also, we were late adopters of you know technical innovations, and so I went off. Well, I barely graduated college, basically because of mental and physical health problems, which is a long story of my perspective. Like that has a lot of my perspective to do with embodiment and stuff, but the very short version of it is that I pushed myself to breaking point. Um, and so, out of college, I was kind of down and out quite a bit, or not out of high school, I was down and out. I went through a lot of rehab, and it was actively productive, the best time of my
Like
life.
counterproductive. You sort of broke up for a second.
Uh, I went to rehab, and I found actively counterproductive.
Okay.
It wasn't like a drugs thing, but it was like a mental health thing, kind of. And without going into detail, kind of like the best experience during that period of my life was being kicked out of everything, homeless, and then going to the homeless shelter because the homeless shelter people had nobody in these programs had hope. They were all either psychopaths, drug addicts, or autistic kids rejected by their families for being weird. And I sort of fit into autistic kids rejected by the families for being weird category there because I wasn't a drug addict and I wasn't a psychopath. Um, but I left that and I went to Job Corps and I went to the computer repair program in Job Corps. So that was like an environment. It was computers. Theoretically, we were learning how to fix computers, but really, like the group of kids that I was with, we were very bright. We were very sharp. We were just not embedded in the opportunity that sends people to college. And so we spent like an hour a day doing the computer repair program, and then the rest of the time we were reading about programming on the internet
Hmm.
and playing with some code and reading books on hacking and like reading books on like the history of viruses and the original, like we had really old computer systems, like we were running 2000 or XP, so we were definitely out of date, but we started working on that, and I was going into computer programming. I went to community college to do a computer programming, the introduction to computer programming. And, out of high school, my viewpoint on college was this is a waste of time and money. I was also down and alley, like it was this is a waste of time and money. I went to community college for a semester. I'm like, wow, I was so right. This is such a waste of time and money. But simultaneous with that, I had this epiphany that was, wow, all we are doing with these computer systems, like these phones, these slates of just stone and metal and plastic, like these runes, these slatish runes of stone, these magical slatish runes of stone, is addicting ourselves to screens. And whatever we can do with these things, with this magic, is not going to solve the problems of humanity, the existential problems of humanity, because we as a species do not have the wisdom to utilize them. And so I abandoned computers as like a field to solve the problems of humanity. I was contemplating rather deeply at that time, my early 20s, of, like how are we going to get out of this mess? How are we going to not be miserable? I was thinking about this because I was miserable,
Hmm.
and I had
Not
been
really well, I would
for,
say, species.
huh?
The attempt to not be miserable, I would say it's not going particularly well at the moment for the species.
Yeah, we're not on the path. And a lot of the solutions that we idealize are not going to bring it to us, not because they couldn't bring it to us, but we won't bring it to ourselves with them. And so I kind of abandoned all that, wandered off into the wilderness, as they describe it, and contemplated what it means to be human in a very Greek philosophical sense of just sitting in nature and contemplating myself. And from that I grew wise, maybe not fully wise, but um, to the attainment of wisdom where I felt wiser than my brothers, in sort of the metaphorical sense. And from that perspective, I've been trying to continue my path of growth while figuring out how to solve the problem of broadcasting wisdom in such a way that we can transform ourselves and therefore the world um, across my lifetime.
That's a very hard problem. So I think a lot of people seek to broadcast wisdom, or they tell you they're broadcasting wisdom, but really they're just interested in doing that for a living, or they're sort of in love with their own ideas more than in love with the truth, that kind of thing.
And so that was my journey, very much the same as you. Love was my first, or nature was my first love, and then I tried. I encountered the suffering of the world, and the story of Buddha sense, right? And then sought a solution, and I went immediately to the most sophisticated solution system, which was computers. Found that to be lacking, and then sat under the tree until I became enlightened. And I think that that story, even though you come from atheism and I come from Christianity, we've met across our stories. Each stage of the story kind of integrates.
Mm-hmm.
If you take it to the metaphorical level. So yeah, that is quite a bit of it. And so back to what's sacred and sort of it's what is worth sacrificing yourself for. I think of there's three things that fit into the landscape of sacred. One of them stands out on a certain level as being sacred, not because, and this is why I prefer, in some sense, the language of death to the language of sacrifice. Is there are certain things that are so profoundly powerful that you can only die to them. It's not a nature. It's not.
It sounds very Christian to me.
Which, and there's various ways of talking about this. In the modern world, we're almost entirely isolated from these things. Like that's almost the definition of the modern world, is the isolation from the things. And so I would describe these as forces. So these sacred forces. And so a sacred force might be senescence. A sacred force might be the ocean. A sacred force, in some sense, might be the wind and a storm. And so that one in particular, I think, is worth talking about because we probably have the closest appreciation of it in the modern world. Because of like the modern world and enlightenment grew out of the nautical, the explosion of like nautical supremacy from Europe, and like the great age of sail. So we are very embedded in kind of like, the ocean as this great mistress mythology that gives us, I think, the best narrative appreciation of this stuff. But most people have never actually experienced the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And like last week or 2 weeks ago, I think it was last week. Yeah, last week. I'm a kayaker, and last week I took my kayak past the breakers into the swell along the Pacific coast here. And good God, man, let me tell you, getting out past the breakers is fucking terrifying. You are a very small boat in that kayak, and the ocean is a very powerful monster. It can throw you about like nothing. And I'm a decent kayaker. I can roll pretty good. I've done day-long kayaking trips. I've got good endurance. I'm reasonably strong. I'm not like really super powerful, but I'm confident in my abilities. I was not prepared the first time I went out, and I was barely prepared the second time out. First time I went out into the breakers, I got almost all the way out into the swell, and the waves came in, tossed me about, made me upside down. I had to pop myself back up from underwater. Not quite near drowning experiences. I've had enough of those to know what they are, but I was worried about those while I was going through it. I could I didn't taste death, but I could smell it. And I've tasted death before, so I mean that with some profundity. And so eventually I realized that I was not a match for the ocean. And so I turned around and I had to pull out of my kayak and swim it back into shore waterlogged. It was a rather grand journey. I was right at a outlet that feeds into the ocean, so undertow was a concern. And I was definitely thinking about, should I be swimming a mile crosswise so I can be over the sandbar going back in, or should I just fight this? And it wasn't so powerful that I decided to just swim straight in, and save myself the time and energy of going across it for an indeterminate period in order to turn back in. So I made it to shore. I survived, but it was a rather dramatic period. And then the second time, I had to rework a lot of how my kayak was set up and my gear was set up, and mentally how I was psyched for it. I did an energy drink and some other things, so I was fully psyched going in, and then pushed myself out. And I almost gave up, but I eventually got up to it, broke into the big swell, edge of the sandbar, waves that felt like trying to kayak over a house. That's how grand these waves were. They were probably in reality at least a story tall, and they felt like 2 stories tall, and they were definitely like trying to kayak up a roof. Like those waves were fucking terrifyingly huge, and you're sitting in it. You're like 3 feet tall in a kayak, so it's like everything is over your head, and it's just massive. And like if one of these breaks, it'll just throw your kayak. You have no control over it. If you're spitting right into it and you've got good balance, you might be able to just like take the brunt of the wave on yourself and pass through to the backside, go down the wave. But it's scary, dude. Like that you could fuck up and drown. And so I got into the swell, and it's these massive waves, but they're so slow that you can almost just sit on them and not pay attention and barely notice that they're there. And that was a big swell, but through such an experience, you develop a really deep appreciation for what the ocean is. The ocean as a mistress. This tumultuous thing that is more powerful than you, that is, the mood of which, really orients how your life goes. And, it's very much like a really passionate lover is much the same way. And, the metaphor there, is quite profound. And then the narrative history, like I grew up on Hornblower,
Is that Midshipman Hornblower?
Yeah.
Oh, is that Patrick O'Brien?
I believe so.
Okay, I read that one, but I read all of the Aubrey Maturin series.
And like Master and Commander, that series. Like, there's a number of like great literature classics that are this sort of nautical tradition, and it's very it mythologizes the sea in a way where it's still rational isn't quite the word, but it's like it's like of the Western intellectual tradition, like the high tradition, but it's still mythological. Moby Dick is a great example of like this, probably the pinnacle of this, literary tradition is Moby Dick. Mm-hmm. And so I've experienced the deep version of this. Like I was out there on the swell, and the waves are huge and it's terrifying. And I had to take some deep breaths. The rest, I started to like really feel it, like the stress, in my forearms, and like my hands were getting cold. Like I didn't feel powerful enough to go back in. I started to go back in. I'm like, man, these waves are too big. I can't handle it right now. I had to go out and rest. I had to go back 2 times back into the swell before going past the breakers. Eventually I surfed in. These massive waves, you get onto the top of the wave and it starts to break, and you're on top of the break, so it's just like it's like a roller coaster ride, and it's just so much power behind you, and you're going so fast, and you have very little control. You're just trying to stay on top of the monster. It's like, riding a bronco or riding a bull at a rodeo. It's at least, that, level of terrifying power where all you can do is hang on for dear life. And, that wave bowled me, and, I spun, popped myself back up, got onto another wave, rolled in, and then I was, in knee-high water basically. And okay. Yeah, I've got to go relatively soon. Dinner is nearly finished, but I was through that, and so I think that's probably the framework of best appreciation. But if you go out into a storm in a boat that is appropriately personal, it doesn't have to be a kayak, but something where one person is in control of the boat. So sailboat that's of an appropriately personal size, but you can take it up to a relatively large craft.
It reminded me of the swimming scene in Gattaca.
Yeah, that's actually a decent story, and a decent model of it. It's like you can go all the way out, and you know the land, like the spirit of the land, can pull you back even if you're empty.
Mm-hmm.
That there's something profound there, and it's a great movie, and that's a great scene. And yeah, that's about that's what it feels like. In some sense, that's a good parallel to what I'm talking about. But you meet God in places like that, or in the Christian tradition. But you meet the sacred forces in an environment like the open ocean in a way that you might not encounter often in other
This,
experiences.
this category of sacredness really seems deeply intertwined with awe to me.
Yes.
Another form of sacredness, or sort of one of the things that I've actually also been thinking about in the context of sacredness recently, is how incessantly our minds are searching to make meaning of everything that we encounter. One of the things that I was thinking about was very mundane. It was debugging a printer that doesn't work. I was thinking about how different the experience of debugging a printer that doesn't work is when you have no idea what's going on. You're not familiar with a particular printer. You're not familiar with the computer. Everything seems to be sort of senseless and meaningless, and you can't really even visualize a path towards a solution. I think it's how a lot of people, especially people who are not familiar with technology, feel. It's a really dispiriting, uncomfortable, angering experience. And most people's response to that is to just stop working on it or hire, call tech support or whatever. I think that a life in which you lack sort of a spiritual foundation is in some ways analogous to being constantly, for a lifetime, just sort of metaphorically debugging that printer, but with no hope of really figuring out how anything works, and with no hope of anybody helping you. So I think that specifically what I mean is the people, I think, when atheism was really beginning to take hold in the Western intelligentsia, would say that you can't have a fulfilling life without faith. You can't have morality without faith. But they really would say something about your soul would lack spiritual nourishment without faith. I think those are all different ways of saying that without some sort of explanation for the system that you are at the center of, without some sort of explanation for what your meaning is, and also just like how things work in some sort of unified, satisfying way, we just feel very uncomfortable and unhappy because we're operating in a system that we don't understand. And so I think that the attraction of many religions is that it offers some way of making sense of what the hell is going on.
So I don't think it's a not understanding, because like the atheistic worldview rationalizes everything.
But he doesn't really understand. There's the biggest question. The question of purpose is left unanswered, and so not having an answer to the biggest question is deeply
So I think a better framework for this is not having a justification for suffering and a justification for meaning that overcomes suffering. I think that's a better
that reminds me of make work and
linguistic
make work
framing for this.
I think that's a good point. I guess
and so I want to get back to sacred forces because I've got some other categories that I want to talk about, but I want to sort of continue down the thread of the sacred instead of getting lost sort of in the the atheism side and like talking about that, because I think it'll be more interesting as we pursue this, and I also have to get off, so I want to complete my thought.
Yeah, go for it.
So another thing that I find that fits this, and I think awe is one word, but I think sublime is maybe a more profound word to use to describe these experiences. So the ocean is just like raw force, like things that are so powerful. Like, and one way to put this is that I consider like a kayaker out on the ocean to be way more manly and sort of masculine in like a deep sense of masculine, even though you're sort of submissive to the force of the ocean, than say a cruise ship captain who's at the top of this very rigid hierarchy in power of this giant iron construction that can just overcome the ocean trivially. I think that there's like our ideal of masculinity would make the ship captain sort of the more masculine and the kayaker feminized, and I think that that is a not an ideal model. There's something sort of toxic masculinity is a bad word to describe, bad linguistic framing for a concept of like a bull that has gone mad. And I want a word that describes that, that works better than any of the languages that I can come to. Like arrogant, like I have a redefinition of arrogant that I quite like. Because pride and arrogance are often defined as essentially the same thing. And I don't like the way that they're used. I think that pride is sort of the your pride in your work. So it's like an upwelling of feeling that comes with like truly doing something profound and good. It's like this reinforces my motivation to do beautiful things. That's pride. And it's like I will protect beautiful things. That's also pride. And then arrogance is kind of a pride that is blind. And there's something to that where like I've got a mythological story that I wrote in a like profound psychedelic state that carries that the concept of pride plus blindness as sort of a necessary evil to survive a monster. And like there's a lot more that I want to say to that, but I can't because time constraints here, and also it's not the point. But there's something beyond arrogance. It might be the sort of the Machiavellian triad, but there's something beyond this that we don't have language for. It's the malevolent king is maybe a close articulation of it, but it's I guess let's put that on hold and move to the next, and then I might go back to it to kind of continue the articulation of it. So another thing that fits into this force is the sublimity of walking through the Badlands in the United States. So Eastern Washington, Utah, that region of Badlands where, there's just ancient stone that has been carved by nature over millions of years. And there's something sublime about it where a single footprint can last for 100 years there because of the cryptobiotic soil, where the soil builds itself over hundreds of years. And like, between the rains and like the structure of the filaments of the fungi hold it together, between the rains, but it basically only lives during the rain. And then, it's sort of in a dormant state.
Wow, that's
between
very
rain
interesting. What
periods.
is that one? I never heard
And
any. I did not know about that about the soil.
because it's basically sand, but it's held together by the soil, which is like the the microbes that live in the environment, and it's sort of held together. It's like if you had a chunk of it, you would pick it up and it'd feel like really dry, like the dry sand where you like can pick up a chunk of it, except like 3 or 4 times harder. Like you can break it with your hand, but it doesn't crumble quite the same way that just like dry sand does. Like dry sand, it was wet and compressed.
Mm-hmm.
It crumbles, like it's halfway between dry sand and clay in terms of its crumbliness. Um, and it was close to like clay as a consistency, but it's held together not by the bonds, like ionic salt bonds that hold together dry soil, but by the actual filaments of the fibers of the um, fungi and bacteria that are in a dormant state in between the rains. And this is the soil that extracts the nutrients that allows the plants, and also holds the moisture that allows plants to grow in the desert. And so everything in this environment is ancient. Like the cactus lived for hundreds of years. The acacia trees live for hundreds of years. The sagebrush lives for hundreds of years. The ponderosa pines of like the California mountains, the desert mountains there, lives for thousands of years. It's everything there is ancient because the time span of the desert is so slow, because everything that happens, it happens during these bursts of rain. Every time you get rain, life happens and explodes, and then the wildflowers come up, and then it might be hundreds of years of the seeds sitting in the soil before rain comes again, and it's an explosion of life. But then the winds blow and they gradually erode the sandstone, and so everything there is just spectacularly ancient, and you walk through it, and if you have an understanding of it, and many American tourists who go to these places have no understanding of it, but if you have an understanding of it, every footstep can change the world for 100 years. Every decision you make, like as a Boy Scout leader, toppled over one of these standing stones. It's millions of years of erosion destroyed in a second of a photo op leaning up against this rock. And it's like, that's such a sacrilegious act. Like the arrogance of thinking that you deserve as a human to touch this thing that is representative of a million years of existence.
This is related to what I think of as the human centrality delusion, where a lot of people think of themselves as central, not only as individuals, but they also think of their culture as central, their species as central, in a way that really hinders understanding.
And you can get the same profound searing feeling in an old growth forest. And like going to the Sequoia National Monument, that was an experience for me on that level. I'll probably describe it another time, but so these are like fundamental forces: time, just like raw power of nature. Gravity might fit into this in some sense. Like you stand at the edge of a cliff and you get the same fundamental feeling. And that's why parachuting and base jumping are such profound experiences. Like flight is deep magic because it overcomes one of these fundamental sacred forces. But we experientially know these in kind of a deep way. Senescence is one of these. Evolution would be one of these forces. And so these are fundamental forces, and like they're in essence inescapable within reality as we understand it.
Do you think you have time to build this or conclude this into your definition of gods before we have to eat dinner?
Yeah, I can shortcut a bit and we'll get there. It's not going to be fully optimized, but it'll be good enough, and it'll be a good cap for this discussion. So from sacred forces, the forces meet, or that's really in the wrong language, but there's the concept of the unstoppable force and movable object. So when we are pushed around by these forces, we need immovable objects to bind ourselves to understand ourselves and to like hold existence, to hold on to existence. You know, so we need something to grab onto, subject to these forces, and so I describe those as sacred objects. And the most articulate sacred object that I have an understanding of is like the object might be described as the future of existence is sacred.
Oh my God. Wow. That's not coincidentally, perhaps, the foundation of what I think would be the most plausible and the most compelling new foundation of enlightened spirituality.
Yeah, I, it's like we are in the same milieu is not even a profound enough word. Like we are in the same landscape, and we've wandered into it from like, completely detached paths. And yeah, so like, I think we are exactly in this, like we are finding the same things from completely different perspectives. And so, yeah, I think that that's the best articulation of that particular sacred object that I have. And the two places where you can see this object make itself known within modern culture is environmentalism. Like the best of environmentalism is sort of we need to care for the environment because the environment is there for future generations, and every extinction is a tragedy of a profound nature. And like this is like the meeting of time and like the meeting of evolution is in some sense like environmentalism, right? So these forces meet and create this object, and it's environmentalism. But the articulation of the object is the future of existence is sacred. And then on the right, you get the pro-life movement. And the pro-life movement is something like, future generations are sacred. And there's a like really deep concern there with the pathology of not holding the life of future generations as deeply sacred, that is there's a door opened by abortion that allows us to psychologically detach ourselves from future generations in a way that we couldn't before because we were so deeply embedded in our own biology. And there's a deep conflict there that we're trying to hand wave away with like 20 weeks or 15 weeks or 10 weeks or
I think in
whatever.
A lot of ways, it's not even really about abortion, period.
Yeah,
really about the act. I think it's the sort of the meeting point of the conceptual and philosophical and religious disagreement, but in some ways, it's an arbitrary meeting point.
Yeah, and what like the way I tried to articulate this on a previous video on my podcast channel here is we need a culture of life in like the deepest pro-life sense of this sacred object, but the problems that we're producing for ourselves and the solutions to problems that we're excluding ourselves by strictly limiting abortion are not actually the path to solution. So we need a culture that holds abortion within a culture of life in such a way that synthesizes the two extremes into a meta solution, a three-dimensional solution that actually builds a better world. And since we aren't talking about this, we have no concept of what this would look like, but that's the real conversation. And I don't have great articulations for this off the top of my head, and it was a different conversation anyway. So I want to move on unless you want to riff for a minute.
No.
But those are two examples of this sacred object, and there are other sacred objects that are the meeting places of these different forces. And I don't want to try and systematize these things because there's also dark gods where you synthesize the wrong things and you create evil. And like I really don't want to give the idea of like each force meets and that creates an object. Like this is the wrong perspective. But it's like I think that the way to think about it, there are forces, they meet. You need immovable objects in order to sustain existence. It's more complex than that, but that's the underlying environment that if you examine it, you will come to an understanding that will iterate itself across time and improve itself across time. But it's not as simple as this articulation creates the systemization that solves the problem. And so that, that's that. And then these objects are multidimensional, so you can look at them from different perspectives. Like this one object, we have the environmentalist on the left and the pro-life on the right. They're looking at different faces of this object. If you imagine it in sort of the sense of the 2001: A Space Odyssey obelisk, different faces of it have different dimension, they have different shape, they have different meaning. And, you need a wholized perspective of the sacred object that, built an understanding. And, this is this idea that I've articulated previously in a very small amount of, like what you said about objectivity producing these paperclip optimizers that's causing like huge problems. And my response is objectivity is dumb. Like there are really useful things in objectivity, but simply objectivity is dumb. What we want is not multiplicity, but what was the word that I used? Poly. Hello, cat. Polysubjectivity. So a synthesis of subjectives, a synthesis of perspectives. And so perspective, the viewpoint, produces personification. So you identify with the viewpoint, that's personification. And so gods are personifications of sacred perspectives of sacred objects.
I think that's a pretty good analysis. I think the personification is also somewhat connected to what I was saying earlier. I wanted to pin the conversation about visualization. I think that very frequently we are much more able to understand and deal with powerful forces in our life if we assign them some sort of
Recording is on.
All right, so we're back for a final time. We're just going to cap the conversation, and sort of Cyrus was saying that we use the cognitive circuitry of sort of empathy and personification to solve problems because this perspective analysis gives us a very powerful toolkit that we've evolved over like eons to understand different things like interactively.
It can be helpful to empathy. It can also be helpful, actually, to sort of have conviction in your resolve to oppose a force. And
Yes.
I think this probably happened after the recording stopped, but I was talking about wait but wise instant gratification. I'm talking about how it's a very powerful cognitive tool to subdivide your own conception of self into sort of your real self, even though it may not exist in a literal way, and then some of these personified other selves that you are in opposition to. It's much easier to think, I'm not going to procrastinate because I'm not going to let the instant gratification monkey win. Fuck that guy. Than it is to say to yourself, I'm just going to really self-discipline. Like I'm better than that. I need to do it. But I think it's easier to sort of dig your heels in against personified force, and it's easier to really see the beauty of and the power of a personified force than it is to strictly think of things in abstract terms only.
Yeah, it's far easier to fight an enemy than it is to fight a wall.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the enemy is harder to beat, like if you're looking at it in a D&D statistics level, even if the enemy is easier or is harder to beat, it's far easier to fight the enemy than the wall. Sort of in the tilting at windmill sense, as well as sort of the broader psychological sense. And to the point that you were making, this is also a sort of classic line from Jordan Peterson, where we personify things because the part of our brains that deals with social interactions is highly evolved in us primates in comparison with the parts of us that deal with whatever specific thing. So building it within that circuitry gives us a much more emotional weight and power and gravitas, which motivates us, which gives us more energy to actually solve the problem. And yeah, so you've got force, object, perspective, personification, God, and that's the way that I've articulated the structure of these things. And then sort of the perspective in some sense comes from the environment that you're in. And so the gods diversify off of the object. So there's each object will, within a single structural, psychological system, cultural system, a single object might have multiple gods, but within the totality of the world, you're going to need many more gods than that. There is more than one pantheon because there is more than one um, place to stand in order to see the object.
Hmm. I had a thought about monotheism, which is not a great place to end the conversation on because it would open up the discussion too much. I feel like we should end with the summation of the force to God spectrum that you just, or not spectrum, sort of development that you just laid out.
Process, iteration, something like that. Yeah, I think this is a pretty good place. Thank you, Cyrus. This was a fantastic conversation. Definitely one that we're going to continue, I think.
Yeah.
But this is exactly the kind of conversation that I'd been hoping we would have, and definitely like the level of this conversation where we're speaking something that we understand inside, that I've never articulated a lot of this stuff to another person where it felt like reciprocal. But like oftentimes I've never articulated this stuff because I knew that nobody would understand really what I'm talking about on a deep level, and I don't want to get attacked isn't the right word, but to meet a wall on something like this and then dispirit myself. So I've been saving a lot of this stuff to have the conversation in a way that builds it. And it's great that I'll say something and be like, oh, that is this thing that I've understand that I've never had these words to, and I've created my own words for, and we're doing that back and forth to each other across this conversation. And I've like that's deeply profound, like that we're having a conversation that each of us has had in our head 1,000 times that we've never spoken.
This is the silver lining at the heart of the revolution. That conversations like this with people we've never met.
Yeah, and it's the kind of conversations where you meet somebody and you say things that you've never said before, but you've thought 1,000 times, where the other person hears you. It's that's transformative. Like those are the things that we write poetry about, and we tell romances about. And this is the meeting of two minds that think alike in different languages is or the core of like a core of a lot of human profundity. And like the one of the stories that I read that really hit me was this. It might have been like Camel Girl. So I've read a couple of these stories, which is basically like person gives up on society. True story. Person gives up on society, goes out into the wilderness and does a through hike. Right. So there's a couple different ones of these. That are, and it's usually like a female protagonist. But there's also male protagonist ones. But there's a camel girl who basically, hired out, like went to some village in Australia, learned about camels, and then took the camels across the desert of Australia. And during a period of this, she had a Aboriginal guide, and they like spoke no words together. But over the course of like the month that they spent together, they learned how to communicate on such a profound human level. The understanding that they shared, like just by gesture and embodiment, was deeper than she had ever felt between her and any of her friends that she had grown up with in like Adelaide or Sydney. And I think that we spend so much time in the articulate linguistic world that we never actually meet mind to mind. We almost exclusively meet, um, words to words, or argument to argument, or debate to debate. We don't even meet language to language. We don't meet culture to culture, and we certainly don't meet mind to mind, soul to soul, person to person. And so this kind of conversation where we have met somewhere where we found this place completely by ourselves, and we find that we share the same place, maybe not in perfect harmony, but we share the same place in a profound way. Like, we want to deepen this meeting. Like, we want to find ways to embody this meeting together. We want to find ways to like share this meeting like to the core of self, like through all layers. Like, we mostly met on the linguistic layer, but like, the goal of something like this, we're on video and there's a limitation to the embodied sharing, but like, this is part of what we're participating in, is not just the meeting of minds, but like to build a broader meeting out of this. And so I want to leave with that kind of contemplation. So I hope that doesn't like, kind of disrupt the conversation, but I want to take this and make it deeper and feel it and live in it, and to carry it in myself, and for you to carry it in yourself in a way that we can't access through this call, but we might be able to access and practice, sort of like in the contemplative meditation, or embodied yoga, or something like after this call, where we're contemplating the call and like try to take it deeper, and to live in it in a way that is not common, even when there's a deep meeting of the way that we've had.
I think that this is another example of the, if not a sacred force, then at least a manifestation of the sacred, is the feeling of connection with somebody from a different place, a different time, a different culture.
Full agreement. I definitely don't have words for it, but this is like we tell stories about souls that intertwine themselves across many lives. The souls that go into the afterlife and find each other again. The most profound love stories that we tell.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about that meets in the primordial soup of what we are doing here, where there's a shared like interwoven soul, that we have both touched, and that the touching of which is so deeply profound, that we can't even like speak to it to each other. And it's like we're in a culture that's so abstract from these kind of things that we're not even we can understand it in an intellectual way, but we're not feeling it right now. And part of that's the distance between us in a geographical, digital sense, but also in some of it's the distance we have between ourselves and ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And ourselves in the world and ourselves in the spiritual sense. We're both abstract from the deep self that we want to be. Each of us individually. So there's a distance between us that is the distance between ourselves and our deeper selves.
Mm-hmm.
That it has nothing to do with you and me, but has to do with me and you and you. That actually creates a distance between us. But we can sense that if we take the thread and we pull it, we find the soul-to-soul meeting at the end of that thread that, like, I'm trying to articulate the importance of.
Mm-hmm.
That is like this meeting that is this, like, it's one of the most profound stories that we as humans tell to each other. It's like, it's something about, you know, this kind of human meeting, and, you know, it's in that sacred territory, but it's a human sacred territory versus a, you know, fundamental sacred territory. And, you know, I want to leave on, you know, that level of humanness. And, you know, I'd like to let you do your final piece, but, you know, this is the kind of thing that I want to step away from contemplating.
I don't think that we need redundant concluding words. I'll just say that it was fun, and there's definitely more to talk about. So I'm happy to chat some other time.
Certainly. So, you know, thanks for speaking with me, Cyrus, and I'll see you around. And I felt this conversation quite a bit, and so
Pleasure.
glad that it's taken place.
All right. Have a good night.
You too. Good night, and happy Columbus and Indigenous Peoples Day.
Thank you. Same to you.
Peace.